The letter trembled in Eleanor Jennings's hands as the stagecoach lurched over another rut in the dusty California road, and she wondered if the man waiting for her in San Diego would see through her carefully constructed lies the moment she stepped down from the coach. She had written to Xavier Quinn 3 months ago, responding to his advertisement for a mail-order bride with words that painted her as capable, healthy, and whole. She had left out the part about the terrible scars that covered her left arm and shoulder from the fire that had killed her parents 5 years earlier. She had left out the part about how her aunt and uncle had treated her like a burden, a damaged thing that nobody would ever want. She had left out the part about how she had prepared herself for rejection her entire life, building walls around her heart so thick that sometimes she wondered if anything could ever penetrate them. It was April of 1878, and Eleanor was 22 years old. She had spent the last week traveling from Missouri, where her aunt had practically shoved her out the door with a mixture of relief and disdain. The stage was hot and cramped, and the 2 other passengers, a merchant and his wife, had stopped trying to make conversation with her after the first day when she had given only short, clipped answers to their questions. She read Xavier's last letter again, though she had memorized every word. His handwriting was surprisingly neat for a rancher, she thought. He had told her about his spread outside of San Diego, about the cattle he raised, about the home he had built with his own hands. He had been honest about the hard work that came with ranch life, about the isolation, about the long hours under the brutal sun. He had written that he was 27 years old, that he had never been married, and that he was looking for a partner who could share the load of building something lasting. What he had not written, what she could read between the lines, was that he was lonely. Eleanor understood loneliness. It had been her closest companion for years. The stagecoach rolled into San Diego just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific Ocean. Eleanor had never seen the ocean before, and despite her nervousness, she felt a flutter of wonder at the vast expanse of blue visible in the distance. The town itself was smaller than she had expected, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that seemed to bake under the California sun. The air smelled different here, salt and sage mixing with dust and horse. The driver called out that they had arrived, and Eleanor's stomach clenched. She wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she had modified to have long sleeves despite the heat. The high collar covered the scars that crept up toward her neck. She had her dark hair pinned up neatly, and she knew that from the outside she looked presentable enough. It was what lay beneath the carefully chosen clothing that filled her with dread. She climbed down from the coach with as much grace as she could muster, her legs stiff from the journey. The other passengers were already being greeted by relatives. Eleanor stood alone with her single trunk and a carpetbag, scanning the faces of the men nearby. A tall figure separated itself from the shadow of a nearby building and moved toward her. Eleanor's breath caught. Xavier Quinn was not what she had expected. She had pictured someone weathered and hard, perhaps with the rough edges that came from years of solitary living. The man who approached her was certainly weathered, his face tanned from sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in his hazel eyes that surprised her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair that touched his collar and a clean-shaven face. He wore practical clothing, denim pants and a work shirt with a worn leather vest and a hat he removed as he stopped in front of her. "Miss Jennings." His voice was deep but quiet, almost cautious. "Yes, Mr. Quinn." She kept her own voice steady, proud that it did not shake. "Xavier, please." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "I am glad you made it safely. The journey must have been difficult." "It was long," she admitted, But I managed, he nodded, seeming to understand that she was not one for excessive conversation. I have a wagon just over here. If you are too tired, we can stay in town tonight at the hotel. The ranch is about an hour's ride, and I know you have been traveling for days. Eleanor considered. Part of her wanted to delay, to put off the inevitable moment when he would discover the truth about her. But another part, the part that had always faced difficult things head-on, wanted to get it over with. I would prefer to go to the ranch, she said. If that suits you. Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, something that might have been approval. That suits me fine. He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient-looking horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a steady hand, then loaded her trunk in the back. As they rolled out of San Diego, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. Xavier drove with relaxed competence, the reins loose in his capable hands. He did not push for conversation, which Eleanor appreciated. Instead, he pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his voice a comfortable rumble. There was the creek where the water ran year-round. There was the old mission ruins on the hillside. There were the mountains in the distance, still holding snow on their peaks despite the warmth of spring. The land itself was beautiful in a way Eleanor had not anticipated. She had grown up with the green humidity of Missouri, but there was something compelling about this dry, golden landscape. Oak trees dotted the rolling hills, and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected bursts of color. The sky seemed bigger here, the horizon stretching endlessly. It is different from Missouri, Xavier said, as if reading her thoughts. Takes some getting used to, but I have come to love it. Where are you from originally? Eleanor asked, finding herself curious despite her determination to remain guarded. Wyoming. My family had a small place up there. After they passed, I wanted to start fresh somewhere new. California seemed like the place where a man could build something if he was willing to work hard enough. He glanced at her. What about you? Have you always lived in Missouri? Since I was born, Eleanor said. Then, because she felt she owed him some truth, she added, I lived with my aunt and uncle for the past 5 years, after my parents died. I am sorry. Xavier's voice carried genuine sympathy. It is a hard thing, losing parents. Yes. Eleanor looked away, watching the landscape roll by. She did not trust herself to say more without revealing too much. They traveled in silence for a while longer. The sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink when Xavier turned the wagon onto a narrower track. Not much farther now, he said. Eleanor's heart began to pound again. The moment of truth was approaching. She had decided during the journey that she would tell him tonight, before anything else happened. Before he thought he was getting something he was not. It would be painful but quick, like ripping off a bandage. He would likely send her back to town in the morning, and she would have to figure out what to do next. Return to Missouri was not an option. Perhaps she could find work in San Diego, though she knew jobs for women were limited. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was modest but solid-looking, a house built of wood and stone with a wide porch that faced west. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and various outbuildings she could not identify in the fading light. Everything looked well-maintained, cared for. It is not fancy, Xavier said, and she could hear uncertainty in his voice for the first time. But it is sturdy. I built most of it myself over the past 3 years. It looks like a good home, Eleanor said honestly. Xavier seemed to relax slightly. He drove the wagon up to the house and helped her down. This close, she could smell him, a scent of leather and soap and something else, something warm that was just him. It made her aware of his size, his strength, but also of the carefulness with which he touched her elbow to steady her. Let me show you inside, he said. You must be exhausted. The house was simple but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a table with chairs near the window. There was a dresser, some shelves with books, a few pieces of practical furniture. Xavier led her down a short hallway. "This is the bedroom," he said, opening a door. "I have been sleeping in the barn. I thought you should have privacy until, well." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Until we marry, I suppose. The ceremony can happen whenever you are ready. I spoke with the priest in town, and he said he could come out any day this week if we send word." Eleanor's chest tightened. He was being so decent, so considerate. It made what she had to do even harder. "There is water in the basin if you want to wash up," Xavier continued, "and I will get some food started. Nothing fancy, just stew, but it is hot." "Xavier." Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Before anything else happens, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her fully, his expression open. "All right." Eleanor took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them in front of her. "I was not entirely honest in my letters, not about anything important, but I left something out. Something you need to know before you decide whether you still want to marry me." Xavier's face became more serious, but he did not look angry. "Go on." "When I was 17, there was a fire at my parents' house." The words came out stiff, rehearsed. She had practiced them so many times. "My parents died. I survived, but I was badly burned. My left arm and shoulder and part of my chest. The scars they are not pleasant to look at. I understand if this changes your mind about the marriage. I should have told you in my letters, but I was afraid you would not. I was afraid." She trailed off, unable to continue. She could not bring herself to look at his face, to see the disappointment or disgust she was sure would be there. The silence stretched. Eleanor felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She had cried enough tears over her scars, over the way people looked at her, over her aunt's constant reminders that she was damaged goods. "Eleanor." Xavier's voice was gentle. "Look at me, please." She forced herself to raise her eyes. What she saw in his face was not what she expected. There was no disgust, no disappointment. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost sad. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That took courage." Eleanor waited for the other shoe to drop, for the polite rejection. "Can I ask you something?" Xavier said. "Are you in pain from the scars? Do they still hurt?" "No," Eleanor said, surprised by the question. "They ache sometimes when it is cold, but mostly they just look terrible." "And your arm, it works all right. You can use it." "Yes, I can do anything anyone else can do. I am not weak or fragile." Xavier nodded slowly. "Then I do not see why this would change anything." Eleanor stared at him. "What? You can work, you are healthy, and from your letters you seem like someone I could build a life with. Why would scars matter?" "Because they are hideous," Eleanor said bluntly. "Because I am marked. Because no man wants a wife who looks like something broken." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Did someone tell you that you were broken?" Eleanor looked away. "My aunt and others. I am not blind. I know what I look like." "You know what I see," Xavier said, his voice firm. "I see a woman who survived something terrible. I see someone brave enough to travel across the country alone to start over. I see someone honest enough to tell me the truth even though it scared her. Those are the things that matter to me." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen for a long time. "You do not have to say that to be kind." "I am not being kind. I am being honest." Xavier took a step closer. "Eleanor, I did not ask for a mail-order bride because I was looking for someone pretty to decorate my house. I asked because I needed a partner, someone strong enough to handle this life. That is what you offered in your letters, and that is what I still see standing in front of me." A tear escaped despite Eleanor's best efforts, rolling down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. I do not understand. What do you not understand? Why, you are not angry that I lied. You did not lie. You just did not tell me everything. I did not tell you everything either. Xavier smiled slightly. I did not mention that I snore sometimes, or that I am terrible at cooking anything that is not stew, or that I talk to the horses like they are people. We are still learning about each other. That is what we will do if you are willing to stay. Eleanor felt the walls she had built around her heart shudder. You truly do not care about the scars. I truly do not, Xavier said. But I care that you were hurt, and I care that people made you feel like you were less because of it. That makes me angry. The certainty in his voice, the steady way he looked at her, made Eleanor believe him. For the first time in 5 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was not broken after all. I am still going to sleep in the barn, Xavier said, lightening his tone. Until we are properly married, that is. I am not that forward, but I hope you will stay. I hope we can make this work. I will stay, Eleanor said softly. Thank you, Xavier. No need for thanks. Now let me get that stew going. You must be starving. That night, after a simple but filling meal, Eleanor lay in the bedroom that was to be hers and marveled at the strange turn her life had taken. She had prepared herself for rejection, had armored herself against it. Instead, she had found acceptance from the most unexpected source. A cowboy in California who looked at her and saw strength instead of damage. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The next few days settled into a routine. Xavier rose before dawn to tend the animals and check on the herd. Eleanor woke early as well, determined to prove that she could handle the work of a ranch wife. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that was already producing in the mild California climate. Xavier was gone most of the day, but he always returned for the midday meal and then again in the evening. They talked more as they grew comfortable with each other. Xavier told her about his plans for the ranch, about how he wanted to expand the herd, maybe get some sheep as well. He told her about the neighbors, few though they were, and about the town. Eleanor told him about her childhood, about her parents and the happy years before the fire. She found it easier to talk to Xavier than she had found it to talk to anyone in years. He never pushed. When she grew quiet, he let the silence stand. When she wanted to talk, he listened with his full attention. It was a gift she had not known she needed. On the third day, Eleanor finally worked up the courage to change out of her high-necked, long-sleeve dresses. The California heat was oppressive in heavy cotton. She put on one of her lighter dresses, one with shorter sleeves that showed the beginning of the scars on her left arm. She walked out to the porch where Xavier was mending a saddle. He looked up when she approached, and his eyes flicked to her arm, but his expression did not change. That must be more comfortable in this heat, he said simply, then returned to his work. Eleanor sat down on the porch steps, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. He had seen, and it had changed nothing. Xavier, she said, I think I am ready to send word to the priest, for the wedding. Xavier's hand stilled on the leather. He looked up at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. You are sure? I am sure. Then I will ride into town tomorrow and arrange it. The wedding took place 4 days later in the small church in San Diego. It was a simple ceremony, with only a few witnesses from town that Xavier knew. Eleanor wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric. Xavier had insisted on buying for her, a soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She had left her hair down at Xavier's request, and though she had been self-conscious at first, the way he looked at her made her feel beautiful. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her gently, carefully, as if she were something precious. It was Eleanor's first kiss, and her heart raced with a mixture of nervousness and something else, something warmer. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Xavier helped her down from the wagon and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Tradition," he said with a grin. "Got to carry you over the threshold." Eleanor laughed, a real laugh that felt rusty from disuse. Xavier carried her into the house and set her down gently in the main room. Then his expression grew more serious. "Eleanor, I want you to know that we can take this as slow as you need. I do not expect, that is, we do not have to." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "What I am trying to say is that I want you to feel safe here. Always." Eleanor felt her heart swell. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw under her fingers. "I do feel safe with you. For the first time in a long time, I feel safe." Xavier turned his head and kissed her palm. "Good. That is good." That night they came together with a tenderness that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Xavier was patient and gentle, and when he saw the full extent of her scars for the first time, he traced them with his fingers and kissed them, and Eleanor felt 5 years of shame and pain begin to melt away. In his arms, she was not broken. She was whole. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Ranch life was hard work, exactly as Xavier had promised. Eleanor learned to milk the cows Xavier kept, to gather eggs from the chickens, to help with the endless tasks that came with maintaining a working ranch. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger. She learned to ride, though she was never as comfortable on horseback as Xavier. She learned to cook more than just the basics, experimenting with recipes and sometimes failing spectacularly, which always made Xavier laugh. Xavier taught her how to rope, how to mend fences, how to read the sky for coming weather. He valued her opinions, asked her advice on decisions about the ranch. When she suggested they plant fruit trees on the southern slope where water collected, he listened and agreed it was a good idea. They planted 50 young trees together, working side by side in the hot sun. Eleanor discovered that she had a gift with animals. The horses responded to her quiet presence, and even the most skittish cattle would calm when she approached. Xavier started bringing her along when he worked with the herd, and she proved to be a natural at the work. At night, they would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge. Xavier would tell her the constellations his father had taught him. Eleanor would lean against his shoulder and feel a peace she had never known before. Sometimes they would make love with the windows open to catch the cool night breeze. Other times they would just hold each other, comfortable in the silence. There were hard moments, too. In June, a pack of coyotes got into the chicken coop and killed half their flock. In July, they lost 3 calves to disease. In August, a drought threatened their water supply, and they had to haul water from the creek every day for 2 weeks. But they faced each challenge together, and somehow that made even the difficult times bearable. Eleanor wrote letters to her aunt, brief and polite, informing her that she was well and happily married. She did not receive a response and found that she did not care. Her life was here now, with Xavier, building something new. In September, they attended a barn dance at a neighboring ranch. Eleanor had been nervous about meeting more people, worried about how they would react to her scars. But Xavier had held her hand and guided her through the introductions with such obvious pride that her fears had faded. The neighbors were a varied lot, some warm and welcoming, others more reserved, but no one seemed particularly concerned about her appearance. Several of the women expressed relief that Xavier had finally found a wife and invited her to quilting bees and church socials. As autumn turned the hills golden brown, Eleanor realized that she had fallen completely in love with her husband. It had happened gradually, in small moments. The way he always made sure she had eaten before he filled his own plate. The way he brought her wildflowers sometimes, just because he thought she would like them. The way he laughed at her jokes, even the ones that were not particularly funny. The way he held her at night, protective and tender. She told him one evening in October as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I love you, Xavier." He turned to her, his hazel eyes warm in the golden light. "I love you too, Eleanor. Have for months now, I think. Why did you not say anything? I wanted to give you time. I wanted you to come to it on your own, without pressure." He pulled her closer. "But I am glad you feel it too." That winter was mild by Wyoming standards, but still cold enough to make Eleanor grateful for the solid house Xavier had built. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading to each other or playing cards or simply talking. Xavier was teaching her to read better, as her schooling had been sporadic. She was teaching him some of the songs her mother had taught her, and his surprisingly pleasant baritone would fill the house on quiet nights. In January, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. By February, she was certain. When she told Xavier, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. Then he set her down carefully, immediately worried that he had been too rough. "I am not made of glass," Eleanor said, laughing at his expression. "I know, but still, we have to be careful now." "The baby will not break either," Eleanor said. "Women have been having babies and working ranches for generations." But she secretly loved how protective Xavier became. He insisted on doing the heavier chores, worried when she lifted anything heavier than a cooking pot, and generally fussed over her in a way that was both exasperating and endearing. As spring returned and Eleanor's belly began to swell, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Xavier built a cradle out of oak, sanding it smooth and carving a simple pattern of horses along the sides. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of a joy she had never imagined possible. The neighbors were generous, bringing gifts and advice. Martha Peterson, the rancher's wife from the next spread over, became a particular friend. She was a sturdy woman with 6 children of her own and a practical manner that Eleanor appreciated. She promised to come help when Eleanor's time arrived. The baby came in late September, just as the weather was beginning to cool. The labor was long and difficult, but Martha was there, and Xavier held Eleanor's hand through the worst of it, his face pale but determined. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs, Xavier cried openly. They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father. He had Xavier's dark hair and Eleanor's blue eyes, and from the beginning he was alert and curious about everything around him. Xavier was a devoted father. He would walk the floor with Thomas at night when the baby was fussy, singing the songs Eleanor had taught him. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep, a look of wonder on his face. Eleanor would watch them together and feel her heart might burst from the fullness of it. Life settled into a new rhythm with Thomas in it. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Xavier's hard work and careful management were paying off. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, and even hired a hand to help with the heavy work. Eleanor managed the household and cared for Thomas while also helping with the ranch work when she could. She was tired often, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from building a life that mattered. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's smile and his mother's quiet determination. He took his first steps in the spring, walking from Eleanor to Xavier across the porch. He said his first word, "Papa," which made Xavier glow with pride. Eleanor pretended to be offended until Thomas's second word was "Mama." And then everything was forgiven. When Thomas was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she felt more confident knowing what to expect. The baby, a girl they named Sarah, arrived on a warm May evening with much less fuss than her brother had made. She was tiny and perfect, with Xavier's hazel eyes and a crown of light brown hair. Xavier doted on his daughter even more than he had on Thomas, if that was possible. He called her his little princess and could deny her nothing. Thomas, for his part, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, from fetching nappies to singing her songs. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. The ranch continued to thrive under Xavier's management and Eleanor's steady support. They added sheep to their operation, and Eleanor discovered she had a talent for the business side of things, managing accounts and negotiating prices in town. The ranch hands respected her, and other ranchers in the area began to seek her advice on various matters. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking after his father in his love of animals and the land. Sarah was spirited and clever, always asking questions and testing boundaries. A third child, another boy named James, arrived when Sarah was 3, completing their family. Eleanor's scars faded somewhat over the years, but they never disappeared. She no longer tried to hide them. She wore them as what they were, proof that she had survived, that she had endured. The children asked about them once, and Eleanor told them a simplified version of the story. Thomas had touched the scars gently and said, "You were very brave, Mama." It was exactly the right thing to say. Xavier aged well, his face becoming more weathered but his eyes remaining kind. His hair went gray at the temples, which Eleanor thought made him look distinguished. Her own hair, which she now wore in a practical braid most days, gained threads of silver as well. They both moved a little slower as the years passed, but their love only deepened. When Thomas was 15, he told them he wanted to be a rancher like his father. Xavier taught him everything he knew, and Eleanor watched with pride as her son became a capable young man. Sarah, at 12, announced that she wanted to learn to train horses properly and proceeded to prove she had a gift for it. James, the youngest at 9, was still figuring out his path but showed signs of his mother's head for business. One evening in the summer when Thomas was 15, Eleanor and Xavier sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The children were in bed, the ranch was quiet, and the stars were bright overhead. "You remember the first night you came here?" Xavier asked, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "I do. I was so frightened. I was so sure you would send me back." "I am glad you were wrong." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." "I thought I was broken," Eleanor said softly. "I thought those scars made me something less, something no one could love. And now," Eleanor smiled, "now I know better. You taught me that. You looked at me and saw me, really saw me, not just the scars. You gave me acceptance when I expected rejection, and it healed something in me I did not even know needed healing." "You healed me too," Xavier said. "I was lonely before you came. I had the ranch, I had my work, but I did not have a partner. I did not have love. You gave me all of that and more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them was the land they had built their life on, acre by acre, fence by fence, season by season. "Tell me something," Eleanor said. "In all these years, have you ever regretted it? Taking a chance on a mail-order bride?" Xavier pulled her closer. "Not for a single moment. You were worth the wait, Eleanor Quinn. You were worth everything." Eleanor felt the same peace she had felt that first night when Xavier had accepted her scars without question. It was the peace of being truly known and truly loved. It was the peace of home. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a kind girl from San Diego when he was 21 and brought her home to the ranch. Xavier decided the spread was big enough to support 2 families and helped Thomas build a house on the eastern section of the property. Eleanor gained a daughter-in-law she adored and, in time, grandchildren who filled the ranch with laughter and noise. Sarah did become a horse trainer, one of the best in the region. People came from miles around to buy horses she had trained. She was independent and fierce, and Eleanor saw so much of herself in her daughter. Sarah married later, at 25, to a veterinarian who settled in San Diego. They visited often, and Sarah's husband and Xavier would spend hours talking about animal husbandry and new techniques. James, true to his early promise, went into business. He started a freight company that transported goods between San Diego and the inland ranches, and he proved to have a natural talent for it. He married a schoolteacher and settled in town, but he came out to the ranch every Sunday for dinner, bringing his wife and, eventually, his children. Xavier and Eleanor's hair turned completely gray, then white. Their hands became gnarled with work and age. They moved slower, and some mornings the old injuries and hard years made themselves known in aching joints. But they still rose with the sun, still worked the ranch with help from Thomas and the hands they now employed. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole community came, it seemed, filling the ranch with people and music and food. Eleanor stood on her porch, watching Xavier dance with Sarah, his face lit with joy, and she marveled at the life they had built. Martha Peterson, now elderly herself but still spry, came to stand beside Eleanor. "You have done well for yourself," she said. "I have been blessed," Eleanor replied. "That cowboy of yours, he is a good man." "The best," Eleanor agreed. "I remember when you first came. You were so nervous, so afraid. Look at you now. You are the heart of this community." Eleanor smiled. "I never expected this. Any of this. I came here prepared for rejection, and instead I found everything I needed." As the party continued into the evening, Eleanor watched her children and grandchildren, her friends and neighbors, all gathered in celebration. She thought about the young woman she had been, scarred and scared, stepping off that stagecoach in San Diego 30 years ago. She thought about Xavier, standing in the shadow of a building, nervous about meeting his mail-order bride. They had both taken a chance on each other. They had both been brave enough to hope. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, Eleanor and Xavier lay in bed together. Their bodies fit together perfectly after all these years, familiar and comfortable. 30 years, Xavier said. "Where did they go?" "Into this," Eleanor said, gesturing at the darkness around them. "Into everything we built, the ranch, the children, this life." "I would not change a moment of it," Xavier said. "Neither would I." Xavier pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the same heart that had accepted her all those years ago, that had loved her through everything, that had never once made her feel like she was anything less than treasured. "I love you, Eleanor Quinn," Xavier murmured. "I love you, Xavier Quinn," Eleanor replied. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more. The ranch continued under Thomas's increasingly capable management. Xavier still worked when he was able, but he was content to let his son take the lead. Eleanor spent her time with her grandchildren, teaching them to cook and sew and raid, passing on the things her own mother had taught her. She told them stories about their grandfather, about how he had built the ranch with his own hands, about how he had been brave and kind when it mattered most. One spring morning when Eleanor was 65, she woke to find Xavier watching her. The sun was just beginning to lighten the sky outside their window. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Xavier said. "I am thinking about that day you arrived, how afraid you were, how brave you were. I am thinking about everything that came after." Eleanor reached up and touched his face, now deeply lined but still handsome to her. "I was so sure you would reject me. I had built my whole life around expecting rejection. I know. You told me once that I healed your soul by accepting you." Xavier caught her hand and kissed it. "But you healed mine too. I was half a person before you came. You made me whole." They rose and went about their day as they had done for more than 3 decades. Xavier tended the animals with Thomas's help. Eleanor cooked breakfast for the family, as Sarah had come to visit with her 2 youngest children. They all ate together, the table full and loud with conversation and laughter. After breakfast, Eleanor and Xavier walked out to look at the fruit trees they had planted so many years ago. They were mature now, producing abundant crops every year. The southern slope was a small orchard, beautiful in its spring bloom. "You remember planting these?" Eleanor asked. "Of course. You told me the slope would collect water and provide shelter from the wind. You were right." "We have been right about a lot of things together," Eleanor said. Xavier took her hand. "We have. But the best thing we were right about was each other." They stood among the flowering trees, 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life of meaning and love. The scars that had once defined Eleanor's life were just part of her story now, not the whole story. The whole story was standing beside her, holding her hand, his eyes still warm with the same acceptance that had saved her all those years ago. As the sun climbed higher in the California sky, Eleanor felt the same sense of peace and rightness she had felt on so many mornings before. This was her life, the one she had built with Xavier, the one she had never dared to dream possible when she stepped off that stagecoach in San Diego in 1878. She had come prepared for rejection. Instead, she had found acceptance, love, and a home that had healed her soul. And in healing her, she had helped heal Xavier too, filling his lonely ranch with love and life and laughter. It was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Eleanor and Xavier grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp, their love still strong. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, welcomed more grandchildren and then great-grandchildren into the world. Thomas proved to be an even better rancher than his father, expanding the operation while maintaining the values Xavier had instilled in him. Sarah's horse training business became known throughout Southern California. James's freight company prospered and grew, eventually incorporating several routes throughout the region. Xavier and Eleanor became the patriarch and matriarch of a small dynasty, their ranch the heart of it all. Family gathered there for holidays and celebrations, for quiet Sundays and times of crisis. The house that Xavier had built with his own hands, the one that Eleanor had made into a home, was always full of people and love. On their 40th anniversary, Eleanor was 70 and Xavier was 75. They celebrated quietly, just the 2 of them, sitting on the porch as the sun set over the ranch. Eleanor was more gray than brown now, her face lined with age, but Xavier still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. 40 years, Eleanor said. It does not seem possible. Best 40 years of my life, Xavier replied. Eleanor leaned against him. Her left arm, scarred and marked, rested comfortably in her lap. She never thought about hiding it anymore. It was simply part of her, like her blue eyes or her practical nature. "You know what I am most grateful for?" Eleanor asked. "What is that?" "That you saw me. Really saw me that first day. Not just the scars, not just the fear, but me. The person I was underneath. You gave me the courage to be that person." Xavier kissed her forehead. "You always had the courage, Eleanor. You just needed someone to see it. I am glad I was that someone." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas's family preparing dinner. Tomorrow, all their children and grandchildren would come for a big celebration. But tonight was just for them, the two people who had started it all with a leap of faith and a willingness to see each other truly. "If you could go back," Xavier asked, "knowing everything that would happen, would you still get on that stage coach? Would you still come to San Diego?" Eleanor did not hesitate. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, you were worth the fear. This life was worth the risk." "I would still place that advertisement," Xavier said. "I would still choose you out of all the letters I received. Over and over again, I would choose you." "Why did you choose me?" Eleanor asked. It was a question she had never asked in all these years. Xavier thought for a moment. "Your letter was honest, not flowery or trying to be something you were not. You told me you could work hard, that you were practical, that you wanted a partner. That is what I wanted too. And when you stepped off that stagecoach, I saw someone brave, someone who had traveled all that way alone, who held herself with dignity even though I could see you were terrified. I knew then that I had made the right choice." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Xavier could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you," she said simply. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Xavier replied. "You healed me, Eleanor. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him everything. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just survival. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They held each other as the sky darkened and the stars grew bright. Their children called them in for dinner, and they rose slowly, hands clasped, and went inside together. The years advanced with increasing speed. Eleanor was 80 when Xavier fell ill with pneumonia one winter. For weeks, she sat by his bedside, nursing him through fevers and chills, refusing to leave his side. The children took turns helping, but it was Eleanor's steady presence that Xavier clung to. "Do not leave me," Eleanor whispered one night when his breathing was particularly labored. "Please, Xavier, I am not ready." Xavier's eyes opened, still hazel even in illness. "Not yet," he rasped. "Got more time with you yet." And he was right. He recovered slowly, getting stronger with Eleanor's careful nursing. By spring, he was back on his feet, though frailer than before. They both knew that their time was growing shorter, that the years they had left could be counted on fingers now rather than in decades. But they did not waste those years. They spent them much as they had spent all the others together. Working when they could, sitting when they needed to rest, always side by side. They told stories to their great-grandchildren, passed on their wisdom to Thomas and Sarah and James, and continued to tend the ranch that had been their life's work. Eleanor was 85 when she finally laid Xavier to rest in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. He had lived to be 90, a good long life by any measure. He had died peacefully in his sleep, holding Eleanor's hand, a small smile on his face. The funeral brought people from all over the region. Xavier had been respected and loved, and the church in San Diego was full to overflowing. But Eleanor felt his loss like a physical wound. After 60 years together, she was alone. Except she was not alone, not really. Thomas and his family surrounded her with love. Sarah came to stay for weeks, helping her mother adjust to the new reality. James visited every day, sitting with her in the evenings, keeping her company. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren came in a steady stream, filling the house with life even in the midst of grief. Eleanor stayed on the ranch. Thomas wanted her to move in with him, but she refused. This was her home, the one she and Xavier had built together. She would not leave it. She continued to work in her garden, to tend the chickens, to sit on the porch in the evenings. She spoke to Xavier as if he were still there, telling him about her day, about the children, about the ranch. Sometimes she could almost feel his presence, warm and steady beside her. One evening, about 6 months after Xavier's death, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas came to sit beside her, bringing her a shawl against the cool air. "How are you doing, Mama?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "I miss him. Every moment of every day I miss him. But I am grateful too. We had 60 years together, Thomas. 60 good years. Not everyone gets that." "He loved you so much," Thomas said. "I remember watching you too when I was growing up. The way he looked at you, the way you worked together. You taught me what love should be." "He saved me," Eleanor said softly. "When I came here, I was so broken inside. The scars on my arm were nothing compared to the scars on my heart. But your father, he looked at me and saw something worth loving. He gave me acceptance when I expected rejection, and it healed me. It healed my soul." Thomas put his arm around his mother. "You saved him too. He told me once that he was just existing before you came. You gave him a reason to build something, to hope for the future. You gave him love and a family and a home. You saved each other." Eleanor leaned against her son, feeling the truth of his words. She and Xavier had saved each other. They had been two broken people who had found wholeness together. "Tell me something," Eleanor said. "Are you happy, Thomas? You and Mary, your children, are you happy?" "We are, Mama. You and Papa showed us how to build a good life together, how to work as partners, how to love each other even when times are hard. We are trying to do the same." "Good," Eleanor said. "That is all I ever wanted, for you children to be happy, to find what your father and I found." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars emerged. Eleanor felt a peace settle over her. Xavier was gone, but his love remained. It was in Thomas beside her, in Sarah's fierce independence, in James's business acumen. It was in the ranch they had built, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their legacy. It was in every board of the house, every tree they had planted, every fence post they had set together. Xavier's love remained, and it would continue long after Eleanor herself was gone. Eleanor lived for 2 more years after Xavier's death. They were quiet years, spent mostly on the ranch, surrounded by family. She grew frailer as time passed, but her mind remained sharp until the end. She told her stories to anyone who would listen, keeping Xavier's memory alive, sharing the wisdom they had gained together. She died peacefully on a warm spring morning, exactly 62 years after she had first arrived in San Diego as a frightened mail-order bride. Thomas found her in her chair on the porch, looking out over the ranch, a small smile on her face. In her hand was an old letter, yellowed with age. It was the first letter Xavier had written to her, all those years ago when he had been a lonely rancher looking for a partner. They buried Eleanor beside Xavier on the hill. The entire community came to pay their respects to the woman who had been the heart of the ranch, the matriarch of a family, a friend to many. Sarah and James and Thomas stood together, grieving their mother but also celebrating the incredible life she had lived. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house. Thomas stood on the porch where his parents had spent so many evenings and looked out over the land they had built together. "Your mother was an amazing woman," Mary said softly, coming to stand beside her husband. "She was," Thomas agreed. "She came here with nothing but hope and courage. Papa gave her love and acceptance. Together they built all of this." He gestured at the ranch, at the family gathered below. "They built a legacy." "What do you think their secret was?" Mary asked. 60 years together, and they still loved each other like newlyweds. Thomas thought about it. "I think they saw each other, really saw each other without judgment or conditions. Papa saw past Mama's scars to the woman beneath, and Mama saw Papa's loneliness and helped him heal it. They accepted each other fully, and that acceptance gave them both the freedom to become who they were meant to be." "It is a rare thing," Mary said. "It is," Thomas agreed. "But it is what I try to give you every day, what they taught me." The family stayed late into the evening, sharing memories of Eleanor and Xavier, telling the stories that would be passed down through generations. The story of how they met, of Xavier's acceptance, of Eleanor's courage. The story of how they built a ranch and a family and a love that lasted until death and beyond. As the stars came out over the California hills, the ranch settled into quiet. The cattle lowed in the distance. The horses shifted in the barn. The wind rustled through the oak trees and the fruit orchard on the southern slope. Everything Xavier and Eleanor had built remained, solid and enduring. Their love story had ended, but its echoes would continue for generations. In Thomas and his siblings, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the very land itself. Eleanor had come to California prepared for rejection, armored against pain. Instead, she had found a cowboy who gave her acceptance that healed her soul. And in return, she had given him everything. Her love, her partnership, her whole heart. It was a legacy worth leaving. It was a story worth telling. It was a love that would never truly die, because it lived on in everyone they had touched, everyone they had loved, everyone who had been blessed enough to know them. The ranch continued under Thomas's care, then his children's, then their children's. 100 years after Eleanor first stepped off that stagecoach in San Diego, her great-great-grandchildren still worked the land she and Xavier had claimed. They still told the story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy, of acceptance and love, of two people who had saved each other and built something beautiful together. And on quiet spring evenings, when the wind blew just right and the stars were bright overhead, some said you could feel their presence still on the ranch. Two souls who had loved each other so completely that not even death could separate them. A cowboy and his bride, together forever on the land they had made their own. It was the kind of love people dream of, the kind that heals wounds and builds legacies, the kind that starts with acceptance and grows into something eternal. Eleanor and Xavier had found it against all odds, and they had held on to it until their last breaths and beyond. Their story was one of hope and courage, and the transformative power of truly seeing another person and choosing to love them fully, scars and all. And that story, that beautiful, heartfelt love story, lived on.